Hi, friends. So today we're going to examine some of the ways that we can approach culture. And then we're going to define culture and explore some of the elements of culture. So, the first thing that we want to talk about is this concept known as perspective. So perspective is going to be a way for us to kind of talk about like what we experience and what we see. So anytime we're talking about our opinions or the way that we're interpreting information, that's going to be our perspective. So let's dig into that a little bit deeper. So what is our perspective based on? Two things that our perspectives are based on are our core beliefs, and these are the things that we hold to be true of the world. These beliefs do not necessarily have to be provable, but you know them to be true. Values are also forces that cause us to have different perspectives. And our values are kind of the things that we believe are standard. So, this is the way that we think people should behave. This is the way that we believe people should act. And it's the things that we hold to be important. And it's based on a judgment. So, if I believe that education, that people should get an education, that if I believe that education helps people to be more successful and to be happier in life, that's something that maybe I could prove, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's actually just my belief. It's based on evidence, it's based on observation, it's based on everything that I have seen, and that's what I believe. So values then, based on those beliefs, I value education. I think it's important for people to read and to learn and to be open to information and to get as much education as they can. So this is where I'm coming from. This is my perspective, and we can start to talk about that from in any capacity. So I used education as an example. What are some of your beliefs? What are some of your values? How do you see the world? So we're going to continue to explore that, because the more that we understand our own perspective, the more we're going to be able to understand others' perspectives as well. This is just a little goofy image that you can look at to kind of get an idea of why the ways that people look at things differently. So we've had a really crummy 24 hours in our country, just understanding that there are people who have different perspectives, which lead them to believe that we should have different leadership in government. And unfortunately, yesterday afternoon, this led to some events in our nation's capital that have that are violent and destructive to our democratic system. So why do these kinds of things happen? And what we're learning is it's because people have different perspectives. They have different ways of looking at the truth. And how does that happen? So let's take a look at some of the different ways that we can be looking at things differently. Okay, this is kind of fun. Some people who look at this see an old woman immediately, and some people who look at this image immediately see a young woman. Which do you see when you first look at this image? And I can give you some help, but I want you to respond. Do you see an old woman or do you see a young woman? And in a second, I'm going to give you a little bit of help. So if you see the young woman first, then over here is where you see her face. Okay. If you see the old woman, then and a lot of people struggle with this one, but it just depends on your perspective. Here's her chin. It's a little creepy. Here's her mouth. This is her eye. This is, I don't know, some kind of growth on her nose, maybe a wart. Okay, but if it's a young woman, this is her face, and this is like a necklace, maybe like a choker, if you will. Okay, let's do another one. All right. When you first look at this one, what do you see? If you see a skull, maybe that's the first thing you see. If you get a little bit closer, I know I usually have to put on my reading glasses. Do you see the woman sitting in the mirror? It's okay, you can look. Betty wants to look, my daughter. She's Yeah, if you look at it in different ways, you might see different things. Okay, I'm going to tell you guys a story. This is called The Blind Men and the Elephant. And you may have heard this story before. So imagine the elephant, and there are five human beings who they don't have the ability to see, and they are led to the elephant. And the first human who is touching the elephant is touching the elephant from the back. So that person gets to touch this part of the elephant. And someone says to them, okay, explain to us, what is it that you are interacting with here? What is an elephant like? And that person, without the ability to see the entire beast, says, well, an elephant is kind of like a wall. It's just kind of flat and hard. And that's what an elephant is like. And then we would ask, okay, so an elephant is like a wall. Well, the second human who has the inability to see the whole thing comes up to the elephant and is touching the trunk. And so when that person is asked, what is an elephant like? That person's response is, okay, an elephant is like a snake. So we have two accounts of what an elephant is like, and they're very different. Okay, one is saying it's like a wall, the other one is saying like a snake. Okay, imagine, because you have three more individuals who can't see. One of them may be touching the ear, and that's the part that they are interacting with, and they're saying it's kind of like a flag. One person might be touching the horn. It's kind of like a knife. Okay, so is each person describing something that is true? Well, the answer is, of course, yes, it's true, but it's limited to just their perspective. Okay, now, how do we get a true picture of the whole elephant? Is each blind person wrong? Well, the answer is no. They're all right, but they don't have the whole picture. Okay. So when we think about perspective, we need to be thinking about that as our goal. So just because one person is telling a story and another person is telling a different story that seems to be the opposite, you're like, well, how can that possibly be true? What we need to do is get the whole picture. Okay. It's possible that one person might be wrong, okay, and one person might be right. But usually there's a bigger picture that needs to be explored. And that's always going to be our goal when we talk about culture. Okay, yesterday you learned this term, ethnocentrism. We defined it as judging another culture through the perspective of your own culture. It can also be defined as the belief that your culture is superior to other cultures, or that the practices of other cultures are strange or unacceptable. Okay, so we learned that this is kind of a natural tendency and we actually experienced ethnocentrism as we judged our own culture because it was discussed in a way that made it seem like it was different. So think about some of those examples, and I know you guys, many of you shared them in the discussion, but what are some of the examples from yesterday's Nasarima experience that show us what ethnocentrism is? Just list a couple. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some concepts that often in this class I put things on a spectrum because things are not typically black or white. There's a lot of gray area in the middle. So I tend to draw spectrums so that we can be thinking about to what extent does something lean to this side, or to what extent does something lean to the other side. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. First, I want you to understand the definition of this term, universalism. We're going to be talking about this quite a bit this semester because we're going to be getting into conflict, which is really interesting because our nation is going through some ideological conflict right now. But universalism is the belief that there is a right and a wrong for certain issues that should apply to all people, no matter what culture they come from, no matter what country they live in, no matter where they're from. Something is either right or it is wrong. So, an easy example for us to talk about is that we believe that taking another human life is universally wrong. Like there's not necessarily a gray area, but taking a life is universally wrong. Now, some of us might say, well, there is kind of a gray area. There are times when it is acceptable or appropriate or right to take a human life. Okay. In that case, um, your belief would be a little bit less universal. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this, the opposite end of the spectrum, which is cultural relativism. Now, this is the belief that right and wrong does not apply to everyone the same way. Okay. And that when we look at another culture, we really need to look at it from the lens or through the lens of their experiences and their perspective. So, in other words, if we in our country believe that it is wrong to just go into someone's house and take some food out of the refrigerator, okay, in another culture, that might not be such a big deal. Okay, so is it universally wrong to walk into someone's home and take something? Um, Universally, is that wrong? Or is it because that in our culture, we believe in owning property and respecting other people's property? Okay, so is this a culturally relative issue? Okay, so this is when you take the approach that practices only seem wrong or strange or odd to me because I was raised in an environment where we learned that this is not a value or this is something we do not believe is okay. All right? So, this is how you know when you're hearing cultural relativistic views. Someone might say this, I might not do that. It's not really something I believe is okay or it's not something I value, but I understand why they do it because of the way that they were raised. Okay, another thing you might say is I might not see things that way, but it makes sense that they would. Or if they were looking at us, they might think that the things we are doing is strange or wrong. So that's cultural relativism. Okay, so I would like you to start thinking of a lot of these issues that we're going to be learning about as far as in terms of where you would place it on this spectrum. Okay, ethnocentrism or universalism is going to be that belief that there is a right and a wrong. Okay, so it is wrong to take someone's life no matter what culture you come from. Or on the other end of the spectrum, it just depends on the situation. It depends on how you were raised. It depends on circumstances. And let's take a look at it through the perspective of that culture. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you guys some scenarios and I want you to test out your position in terms of these issues and circumstances and what you think. If you take on the perspective of cultural relativism or universalism and ethnocentrism. Okay, so have fun with that.